Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it is a pleasure to serve with you and all the members of this committee. I want to begin by thanking each of the distinguished witnesses who have come here today. Thank you for taking your time. In particular, I want to thank you, Captain Kelly, for your service to this country and for your wife's extraordinary journey for her coming here. Congresswoman Giffords has been lifted up in prayer by millions of Americans, and her heroic recovery is inspirational. And please know that you and your family will continue in our prayers in the years to come. My wife and I have two little girls. They're 4 and 2. I think no parent, and in particular no parent of young children, could watch what happened in Newtown without being utterly horrified. Utterly horrified at the depravity of a deranged criminal who would senselessly murder 20 young children at an elementary school. Unfortunately, in Washington, emotion, I think, often leads to bad policies. When a tragedy occurs, often this body rushes to act, and at times it seems the considerations of this body operate in a fact-free zone. I will suggest a philosophy that I think should guide this body in assessing gun violence. And then I would like to highlight and ask a few questions on a couple of points that I think are particularly salient to addressing this issue. The philosophy I would suggest makes sense is that we should be vigorous and unrelenting in working to prevent, to deter, and to punish violent criminals. I have spent a substantial portion of my professional life working in law enforcement. And the tragedies that are inflicted on innocent Americans every day by criminals are heartbreaking, and we need to do more to prevent them. At the same time, I think we should remain vigilant in protecting the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. And I think far too often the approaches that have been suggested by this Congress to the issue of gun violence restrict the liberties of law-abiding citizens rather than targeting the violent criminals that we should be targeting. And I would point out that I hope some of the passion we have seen from members of this committee with respect to the need to prevent violent crime will be reflected equally should we find ourselves in a judicial confirmation hearing with a judicial nominee who has a record of abusing the exclusionary rule to exclude evidence that results in a violent criminal walking free and being able to commit yet another crime. I hope we see exactly the same passion devoted to assessing whether judicial nominees will enforce our criminal laws and not frustrate the administration of justice. 3 points I think are particularly salient. The first is, in my judgment, the proposed assault weapons ban is a singularly ineffective piece of legislation. I was having a conversation recently with a loved one in my family who asked a very reasonable question. She said, "Why do regular people need machine guns?" And you know, one of the things that happens in this debate is the phrase assault weapons ban gets a lot of people really concerned, and they assume, much like the phrase military-style weapons, that we're talking about ordinary citizens running around with M16s and Uzis that are fully automatic. Fully automatic machine guns are already functionally illegal. Ordinary citizens cannot own them absent very, very heavy regulation. This entire discussion does not concern machine guns, and yet I would venture to say a large percentage of Americans do not understand that. I want to begin by talking about the assault weapons ban as it was enforced before, and I would ask for slide number 1. The assault weapons ban that used to be in effect, according to the Department of Justice, quote, failed to reduce the average number of victims per gun murder incident or multiple gunshot wound victims. Now, that is the assessment of the United States Department of Justice, and that is in 1994. That was the Janet Reno Department of Justice under President Clinton that said the assault weapons ban was singularly ineffective. If we could move to the second slide. The Department of Justice likewise concluded that the assault weapons ban, quote, under it, there has been no discernible reduction in the lethality and injuriousness of gun violence. So the reaction to this tragedy in Newtown is for a lot of elected officials in Washington to rush to reenact a law that, according to the Department of Justice, did absolutely nothing to reduce gun violence. Now, why is that? That's not accidental, because the assault weapons ban, if it doesn't ban machine guns, what does it ban? And what it bans, I would suggest to you, are scary-looking guns. If we could move to slide 3. This is a photograph of a Remington 750. It is one of the most popular hunting rifles in America. This rifle would be entirely legal under this so-called assault weapons ban. Now, I have a question for you, Mr. LaPierre. Functionally, in terms of the operation of this firearm, this is a semi-automatic firearm. You pull the trigger once, one bullet comes out. Is the operational firing mechanism in this firearm materially different from the so-called assault weapons ban that this bill is targeted at?
No, it's not.
Now, what the assault weapons ban instead targets are cosmetic features. So, for example, I am holding in my hand a pistol grip. Under this proposed legislation, if this piece of plastic, this pistol grip, were attached to this rifle, it would suddenly become a banned assault weapon. Now, I would ask you, Mr. LaPierre, are you aware of any evidence to suggest that attaching a piece of plastic to this rifle would make it in any way whatsoever even slightly more dangerous?
No, that's the problem with the whole bill that Senator Feinstein introduced is it's based on falsehoods to people that do not understand firearms, to convince them that the performance characteristics of guns that they are trying to ban through that bill are different than the performance characteristics that they're not trying to ban. They make bigger holes. They're rapid fire. They spray bullets. They're more powerful. They're heavy armor. All of that is simply not true. I mean, the AR-15 that people uses a 223, and I hear that in the media all the time, and people say, well, no deer hunter would use something that powerful. I mean, 243s, 270s, 25-06, 30-06, 308, dozens of other calibers used in hunting are more powerful. I mean,
so let me make sure I understand that right. This deer rifle, which is entirely legal and is used by millions of Americans, is sold in the identical caliber as the so-called assault weapons ban, although those look scarier because they have a piece of plastic attached to them.
And the Ruger Mini 14, which Senator Feinstein exempts in her bill, it uses 223. The AR-15, which has the handle on the bottom, which she prohibits, also uses the exact same.
Okay, I'm out of time. I want to make one final point, if I may, which is there has been much attention drawn to gun shows, and indeed the statistic of 40% has been bandied about. Now, that statistic is unfortunately based on a study that occurred before the background check went into effect, and so it is a highly dubious figure. But I do want to point to what the Department of Justice has said, which is in slide 5. The Department of Justice has said that firearms used in crimes, 1.9% of those firearms come from gun shows. So again, in response to this crime, this body does not act to enact anti-crime legislation to prevent violent crimes. Instead, it targets 1.9% of the guns, and a substantial portion of those guns were sold by licensed firearms dealers who already conduct a background check. So even that 1.9%, a substantial portion, are already subject to a background check. I would ask, Mr. Chairman, if we have a second round, I would like to additionally get into the effectiveness or lack thereof of gun control.
I'm going to leave the record open for questions. I think because of the Senate schedule this afternoon, we probably would not have a second round. So, but I will leave the record open so the senator and I have further questions. I won't have time either, but so I can submit my questions. Senator Franken.